Welcome to Classic Trials. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we make sense of the law one bite at a time. In this series, we observe and analyze the play-by-play of some of the biggest trials that have shaped the public consciousness of the American judicial system. In this season, we're working our way through the case of California v. Erik and Lyle Menendez. Growing up in Princeton, New Jersey, and then Beverly Hills, California, these young men had everything they could ever want, or so it seemed, until one night on August 20th, 1989, they approached Jose and Kitty Menendez with newly purchased shotguns. Put on trial for murdering their own parents, they claimed self-defense, arguing they were terrorized in their own home by abusive parents until they could take no more. Which argument is more convincing? Come join and see for yourself. All right, you guys. Oh, hang on a second. Hey. Yes. Good girl. There we go. Gang's all here. You can't see her, but Mavi's right here next to my computer here. Holmes is somewhere. I just saw him. Anyway, he'll be here soon enough because I opened the treat drawer. So anyhow, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a very happy Monday to you guys. I hope you guys had a good weekend. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead of you. And today it's another Menendez Monday. And it is our 60th episode of this series. Of course, I did not anticipate oh my kitty. What are you doing here? Okay, let's move. I don't know why she always insists on sitting in this area right here because there's a ton of like wires and other stuff. Like it can't actually be comfortable. Anyhow, and there she goes again. For some reason, she like has to sit here in this spot. Maybe I need to like put a little bed to put on top of those wires so that she doesn't mess around with them so much. Anyway, so like I said, happy Monday. This is episode 60. We are hearing from two expert witnesses. Last week, we did not finish the testimony for Dr. Stuart Hart. This is in front of only the Lyle Menendez jury. So Erik Menendez's jury is off the hook for this one. And then after he finishes, so we will be getting to his cross-examination today. After he finishes, we will be getting through part of the direct examination of Dr. John Conte. So I believe that this is also going to be in front of the Lyle Menendez jury and not so exclusively Lyle Menendez jury, I think. If I was paying enough attention, I think that's what they were saying. So okay. Yeah, I think that's about it. That's all I needed to say for today. Oh, before I forget, next week we're not going to do Menendez Monday. It's a holiday weekend, so I'm going to treat it as such with the earlier part of the week. And so next week do not expect a Menendez Monday. Or a classic Trials Tuesday, because oftentimes if I don't do it on Monday, I'll push it off to Tuesday. But next week, I decided it's simpler if I just sort of wave off for next week, just because of the number of moving pieces that are in flux for next week. So yeah, so just keep that in mind for next week. I'll put some social media posts out there as well. But that way you guys have a little bit of a heads up on that. And also for those of you who are in Bite Club, first off, thank you so much for supporting the channel. Of course, it really, really does help to give that consistent support so that I can focus on just focusing on the content. So this week, instead of Friday, it'll be on Thursday. So the members only live stream. So the casual Friday members only live stream this week will be a casual Thursday members only live stream. So just wanted to let you guys know now. And again, I'll be posting that. I'll be posting some on social media about that as well. Okay, that's all I have. So let's get into it, shall we? All right. Back with Dr. Stuart Hart. As always, let me know if there are any issues with the sound balance. And if you have any questions, let me know. If I don't answer it right away, I will save it to answer it at a moment when I can, or that is a little bit more convenient. All right, cool.
That time. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see you back here then. With the trial, we have everybody back. And now cross-examination.
Dr. Hart, you've done a lot of research in child development, is that correct?
Research in the area of psychological maltreatment, yes, and children's rights.
But part of psychological maltreatment of children, you have to have a knowledge of childhood development in order to understand how the maltreatment affects the child, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And do you have an opinion as to at what age an adult is responsible for his own life and his own actions?
Well, legally, an adult is responsible, I believe, in most states at 18. In terms of the age at which the person can be considered to be fully responsible, depends a lot on what's happened to them, whether that person is truly capable of being responsible for his or her acts. There are 14-year-olds who are capable of being more responsible than 35-year-olds, but the law doesn't make those distinctions, as I understand it.
Wouldn't you agree?
That is a much more nuanced answer than I think what she was looking for, because of course the answer that she's probably about to supply him as she kind of digs a little bit deeper into it is, well, of course these guys are adults, they're adults, they're adults, they should be treated like adults, which is a common refrain that a lot of people have about this case, and I completely understand. Legally, yes, they should be treated like adults because of the fact that they are in fact adults. At the same time, what his point is very nuanced and very important, is to say that sometimes things happen to a person, to a human being, that makes it much more difficult for them to understand things in a way that most adults would, because of the fact that they've been completely hamstrung by their upbringing, which makes perfect sense.
To agree that there are probably 35-year-olds who are not as capable as others of making adult decisions and into the later years, correct?
Certainly, yes.
All right, so you don't have a set age in your mind as to when someone should be responsible for their own life and their own action?
Well, it would be preferable that they become responsible as they move into their more and more responsible throughout adolescence as they become an adult. But in terms of a set age at which you can be sure that any particular individual can be totally is capable of being responsible for all of his or her acts, there's no age that could be chosen in that sense.
Do you believe that child abuse excuses adult conduct?
It explains adult conduct in many ways. It certainly would be a major contributor to adult conduct in many ways.
Do you think that childhood abuse should excuse legally criminal behavior?
That would be a decision I think a jury would have to make in determining whether that contribution of that child abuse was such that it would create the likelihood of a particular act which would be understandable.
Well, in terms of your own personal motivations, your own personal beliefs, do you think
How much are you getting
that
paid?
every human being who testifies in a court is going to be somewhat subject to their own personal opinions and personal beliefs?
That's a very
That
broad
everyone
question.
who
Testifies
testifies is subject to their own personal beliefs and experiences?
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Even someone who's an expert witness.
Yes, certainly.
Okay, and so my question to you is, do you have a personal belief that an abusive childhood should excuse criminal behavior of an adult?
My point of view would be that there are circumstances under which a child's experiences have been so destructive that they would place that child in a situation in which he or she might act to protect themselves, in which that would be justified to protect themselves.
Well, that would be true of any person who's acting in self-defense, correct?
I assume, yes.
All right. So aside from instances where a child would be acting in self-defense, do you personally believe that childhood maltreatment should excuse criminal conduct?
No, my point of view would be that it can explain the criminal conduct, or at least it can make a major contribution to it in many cases. I think that then a judgment must be made about whether or not that act is an act that would follow from those experiences and the degree to which the person had a choice in that.
Did you hear Dr. Burgess's explanation about the neurobiological responses to fear?
I think I heard just a little bit of that. I wasn't in the court the full time that she gave that. I think I heard some of the last phases of that, and maybe some of your cross examination of that.
I think you were here for all of my cross-examination of hers, weren't you?
I'm not absolutely sure if I was always in the room or not, but I heard some of it, certainly.
Now, their neurobiological response to fear, is that something to which you subscribe?
That's something I really don't know very much about. I've read a little of the material available, and it seems to follow logically from the knowledge base of stress, human stress, that you lower thresholds for certain kinds of actions and for certain for the power of anxiety. But beyond that, I couldn't say much about it.
Now, I believe I asked you, and I'm going to ask you again, do you think that that abusive behavior towards a child, do you personally believe that abusive behavior towards a child excuses criminal conduct?
Objection, asked and answered. You literally said in your question, I've already asked you this and you answered it.
I'm going to object with an answer.
Thank you.
All right. Let me preface my response to the objection by telling the jury that I will instruct you on the law, on what is and what is not information that the jury can consider in deciding the legal issues and the factual issues in this case. And you must apply the law that I tell you applies in this case. These questions that are being asked are being asked only to explore the witness's personal opinions about these matters, to test his views on subjects, to explain or
Get to it, man.
deal with his testimony here as far as any motive or interest or bias or anything else he might have or attitude he might have in the matter, and only for that purpose, not for any legal issues. Those legal issues are things that I instruct you on in the law at the end of the trial. All right.
Sustained.
This question has been asked already, and the objection is sustained.
Thank you.
Well,
Good Lord. You really buried the lead there. But yeah, that was properly sustained. I mean, she literally said, I already asked you this question. So it's like to try to argue that like somehow this is different in some way. I don't know. It's just that was.
Dr. Hart, you said it explains criminal conduct, correct?
It can explain it, yes.
All right, but you are not going to render opinion on whether or not it excuses it. Is that correct? Or that it should excuse it?
Objection asked and answered.
Has not.
Sustained.
Yes. Thank you.
Dr. Hart, in adding up the number of hours that you've told us about that you spent with various individuals, including Lyle Menendez, it appears that it's in excess of 100 hours that you spent just interviewing people. Would that be fair to say?
I think it is in excess of that, yes.
And at what rate are you being compensated, please?
Of course.
Well, let's see.
Any answer question. It always comes. It's
We'll
expert
have put
witness.
in probably 450, 460 hours time in this, and I was paid $5,000 for my involvement. So it must be $11, $12 an hour, something like that, I guess.
You were paid $5,000 for your involvement in this
Yes.
case?
Wow.
And are you
that's not
getting
much.
paid anything for your testimony above and beyond the $5,000?
No,
And you live in Indiana, is that correct?
Indiana.
And you're not a medical doctor, are you?
No.
He's practically donating his time at that rate. I mean, I know that okay, so then again, this is 1993 in comparison to today, you know, you could translate that with inflation. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I'm sure folks in the chat can probably find an inflation calculator. But he said like $11 to $12 per hour for a professional. I mean, that's not a lot of money. I feel like he's basically donating his time for this, even for 1993 money.
I believe you indicated that this case came to you because Ms. Lansing and a colleague of hers approached you personally and engaged you in conversation, which resulted in you ultimately taking this case, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you remember who the colleague was that was with Ms. Lansing?
It was a male, and I'm not sure if it was Mr. Burt or if it was somebody else.
Okay, so it was not Ms. Abramson.
No.
Okay. And when you were given information about this case, who was it that provided you with the information that you ultimately took to the consortium?
Mrs. Lansing.
All right. And when, after the consortium decided to look into this case, who was it that provided you with the interviews that the police and the defense had conducted?
Mrs. Lansing did
Okay.
that. Yeah.
And when you examined the various people that you interviewed, how did you make arrangements to interview those people?
I think that I called all of them myself. I'm trying to remember. Yes, I did. I had a list of names of people who in one way or another were part of the family or associated with the case, and the phone numbers were there, and I believe I called all of them and set the appointments.
Who gave you the list of names from which you chose the people you wanted to interview?
Mrs. Lansing did that.
Did you on your own seek to identify any other witnesses whose name was not provided to you by Ms. Lansing? In other words, did you say, gee, I think I'd like to see a teacher who's not on this list or a coach who's not on this list?
There may have been some conversations about some other teachers. I think I remember something like that. But I selected the names of from that list.
All right, so that was the list provided to you by Ms. Lansing, correct?
Yes.
Did you ever look at any family photographs or family memorabilia?
Yes, I did.
And how many photographs would you say you looked at?
Oh. It would be just a very rough estimate. It was maybe 1 or 2 books full of photographs, so it might have been upwards 50 on up, I suppose, but I don't know how high that may have gone. There were just a lot of them.
All right, and who provided you with the photos that you looked at?
Mrs. Lansing.
Did you get any information, aside from the people that you directly spoke with, did you get any information from any other sources aside from Ms. Lansing? Aside from the
Other
people you told
sources
us,
such as?
well, the police or the prosecution?
I had copies of some of the police reports, the interviews and crime scene reports, things like that.
Those were given to you by?
By Jill Lansing.
Now, you haven't, to your right, and I'm not sure if you can see it, there's a chart up there called psychological maltreatment.
Yes.
Okay, and is that a chart that is recognized in your profession as singling out 6 specific types of maltreatment?
Yes, that's right.
And who formulated these particular categories?
Yes, those categories were the result of years and years of work, but probably the critical point was when we carried out the research project for the Department of Health and Human Services to operationalize definitions. In other words, to clarify and provide definitions of psychological maltreatment that then could eventually be applied in practice. The field for a long time had not had clear definitions, and so this was desired.
Also, really quick, Debbie Faison Cook, thank you so much for gifting 2 Legal Bites memberships. So Tish and BL Blazy, you both have been gifted memberships by Debbie Faison Cook. So welcome or welcome back to Bite Club. And thanks again, Debbie. Very kind and generous of you.
Now, the information that you use to determine whether or not someone has been psychologically maltreated has to be accurate in order for your assessment to be accurate, correct?
Certainly, to make a judgment that would be accurate, you would want the information that you put into it.
And the fact that the information is exaggerated, that would skew your results, right?
If the information were exaggerated, certainly it could, unless you recognized that and took it into consideration.
Okay. Did you at any time consider that any of the information given to you by family members of the Menendez family could have been exaggerated to aid the defendants?
I saw that as a possibility. There's always a possibility that anybody involved in providing information to you might exaggerate if it serves their purposes. It seemed to me, though, that in fact it was the opposite that tended to happen over and over again, which was that there were some things that people didn't want to talk about, or they would play them down a little bit, maybe give them more strength later on, but that was more of the impression that I got.
Now, did you rely in any part upon information provided by Marta Cano?
Some interviews, yes.
Did you personally interview her?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Did you read her testimony in this trial?
I'm not absolutely sure if I've had a chance to read her testimony or not.
Okay. If Marta Cano had testified that she had told a lie for Kitty and would tell a lie to help someone else out of a bind, would you consider that significant in assessing the value of the information she'd give you?
If she told me she had lied before and that she lied again,
Yes.
yeah, it would be of significance in a number of ways. It might mean that what she's providing is information that that she's made up or that she thinks is going to help somebody.
Well, the nature of the lie that she had given was in order to protect someone. I mean, it was, I feel like you need the context to fully understand just how bad or not bad that was that she did that.
Somebody, or it might be that by telling me that she's being more open and honest about it, and that I could put more weight on what she said by telling me that that she has on occasion done such.
Now, as a psychologist, have you received any special training in determining when someone is not telling you the truth?
No, I don't think so. In terms of bits of information or the description of one incident, the training that I've had as a psychologist that would get at the point of truth is the training that basically is associated with reserving judgment when people give you descriptions of their lives, particularly when there are great concerns at issue, or that these are very important to them, and that you don't quickly move to some judgment about whether it's true or not, and to apply what is basically a research orientation to gathering information, meaning that it needs to hold together within, and that you need within the set of information you have, and that there needs to be corroboration or support for some or much of it for you to give it weight.
You think people in the psychology profession can be fooled?
Yes, they're human beings and they can be fooled.
Have you ever heard of the Rosenhan study?
Rosenhan study?
Yeah, the Rosenhan study.
Is that the study which occurred in which they purposely, people made up symptoms of mental illness and to see if they would be erroneously placed in a hospital, a mental hospital?
Yes, that is.
That was, yes, I remember reading about that years ago.
And when you viewed the evidence in this case, did you keep in mind the findings of the Rosenhan study?
Well, I would certainly keep in mind the possibility that someone could present himself or herself in a way that was deceptive. And that there is certainly the possibility, if you don't have sufficient information and you don't look for corroboration of being fooled.
And in fact, in the Rosenhan study, to your recollection, did it reveal that people in the psychological profession had been fooled by students who had misrepresented themselves as psychiatric patients?
That's my memory, that they were able to present symptoms that were accepted as indicating that these people had some kind of psychiatric disorder. Now that you've drawn the point, I'd like to go back to it someday and see if they were psychiatrists or psychologists that were the ones reviewing that information.
All right, and you're a psychologist, correct?
I'm a psychologist, yes.
All right. Now, in addition to viewing the information that you got, did you ever consider that it might have been taken out of context?
The information from any particular source, and any bit of information might be taken out of context. There was so much context in this case that didn't seem to be one of the limitations on making judgments about it.
In childhood development, what is one of the most important. What is the most important thing that a child needs to develop?
The fundamental building block for me is trust. Trust in others, the world, and then eventually trust in yourself. There are lots of things that happen associated with that.
What about food? Children need food.
Yes. If we want to talk about survival,
Yes.
and to keep your physical system moving in addition to what it takes for healthy development beyond that, certainly food and air and water
And shelter.
and shelter.
This, by the way, I'm totally interrupting here, but this totally reminds me of the Ruby Franke evidence dump that just happened on Friday / over the weekend. I'm definitely planning on putting out some content. I still haven't quite decided if I want to do a live stream to go through some of that, or if I want to do something pre-recorded. I'm leaning towards live stream, but we'll see. Either way, I definitely want something tomorrow on that one. So anyway, it like popped into my head because of the food and water thing.
Definitely. Those, you have to be alive to thrive.
And you had no information in this case that Lyle Menendez was denied any of those essentials, correct? The food and the shelter and the clothing.
The only information I had that would have any bearing on that was the information about the denial of food during some of the long tennis practices and some of the dietary or diets that the Jose Menendez became enthusiastic about and then applied. I don't know the degree to which those had any real balance in them or not.
Right. But in terms of those, aside from those specific instances that have been relayed to you, there was no indication that this defendant nor his brother were denied the basic essentials such as food and shelter and
Basic
things like that.
Essentials for physiological survival.
And in fact, in your tenure doing child abuse cases, haven't you seen children who were not even provided with food, even though there was food available?
Certainly there are children who have been abused who are not supplied with food. I guess I am now remembering that in addition to being put in his room at night to stay there when he was a rather young boy, that there's the indication that he wasn't being given food and that in fact he put food under his pillow so that he'd be sure to have some if that happened. So I suppose you could raise a question about that kind of situation.
Did you see any reports, any medical reports that indicated that he had any kind of long-term or short-term effects from being denied food over a period of 6 to 10 hours? Did you see anything like that in his medical records?
No, I didn't see anything like that. I think since the importance of him becoming a fine athlete was given such high priority that that would have been highly unlikely to find anyhow.
Are you familiar with the battered child syndrome?
Yes.
And the battered child syndrome is a medical diagnosis dealing with the kinds of fractures and injuries one sees to a child who's been continually physically battered over a period of time, correct?
It's that kind of thing, yes.
Okay. And battered child syndrome would recognize that certain kinds of breaks to the bones and certain kind of bruising and certain kind of burns would indicate that that child is living in a home where he's continually battered and beaten.
Yes,
okay.
That's right.
Did you see any evidence in Lyle Menendez's medical records that he had any kind of those kinds of batterings? Spiral fractures indicating a twisting of an arm or leg, burns caused by cigarettes being placed on him, bruises from being continually punched?
Excuse me. No, I didn't see.
Yeah. So her definition of battered child syndrome, I think, is going to be a bit more limited than what is accepted today. Like I haven't spent too much time with it, but something tells me we have a much more open definition of that, given that we generally have a much more open definition of all kinds of different abuse. And also, before we get going, Leander, member for 16 months. Thanks so much for being a Bike Club member for 16 whole months. Sweet 16. Have a great day, friends. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today with us. And like I said, for being a member for 16 months. Awesome. Wonderful, wonderful. All righty. That's
He,
the
that kind of
testimony.
information, he had the scars on his face, but I don't know of any x-rays and so on that would indicate the kinds of conditions you've just described.
So you have seen no evidence that he suffered from the battered child syndrome. Is that correct?
The physical aspects of it.
Well, do you understand that the battered child syndrome is in fact a physical diagnosis made
Yes.
by medical doctors?
Yes, but now that's been enlarged, certainly in the way that people deal with it, recognizing that there are these very strong psychological components.
There you
But
go.
At the time that came out, that was the focus.
Okay, so even in 1993, they recognized that the definition was a bit more broad.
I agree with you.
Now, psychological abuse can occur just from the things they say to their children and the things they would withhold from the children, correct?
The acts and the withholding of acts, that's right. Conditions that are applied to the child and conditions that are not there.
And in addition, if a child is beaten or a child is sexually abused, there's a psychological component to that because we are thinking creatures, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any way to distinguish symptoms from child abuse to say that this symptom is a symptom of physical, this symptom is a symptom of psychological, and this symptom is a symptom of sexual abuse? In other words, are there any psychological symptoms such as bedwetting, nightmares, things like that, which point only to one kind of abuse?
Yes. That kind of clarification doesn't really exist. It's being pursued right now. What the developing knowledge base is indicating more and more that that the symptoms that are so often associated with physical abuse and sexual abuse, other than the broken bones and fractures and so on, are psychological symptoms to a large extent, and appear to be particularly tied to the psychological abuse that accompanies or is embedded within the physical abuse and the sexual abuse.
Okay. You indicated on several occasions during direct examination how Lyle Menendez would have felt because of certain behaviors by his parents. Do you remember that's a generic.
Yes, how he would have been likely to feel because of those conditions.
Did you ever talk to him about how he felt because of those conditions?
Yes, we talked about many of his feelings associated with the many conditions that he had.
I believe you indicated you spent 60 hours interviewing Lyle Menendez. Is that correct?
Yes.
When was the first time that you ever saw him?
I'll just take a minute to look, if that's all right.
Certainly, that's fine.
I have October 21 through 24 of 1992.
So October of 1992,
Right.
Is that correct? Your very first contact with him.
Yes, that's what I have noted here. It's accurate as far as I can remember.
Did you request to see any psychological or psychiatric records of Lyle Menendez which predated your first seeing him in October of 92?
Yes, well, I've had access, I believe, to the material that was available, and I've had access to the, again, the evaluations of his physical condition, and there was a intelligence test given to him when he was, trying to remember, 3 or 5. I'm not remembering anything else in particular.
All right. Did you get any psychological records for Lyle Menendez before you saw him in October of 92?
I don't believe so. I did have a fair amount of material, but I don't remember having any information on psychological evaluations before that date.
How about psychological records from having seen a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
No, I didn't have those.
Okay. Do you know if Lyle Menendez was seeing any therapist while he was incarcerated in the county jail before you saw him in October of 1992?
While he was incarcerated?
Yes.
I don't remember having any information about seeing a therapist while he was incarcerated.
Okay. Do you know what he was doing between March of 1990 and October of 1992 when you saw him? Do you know what his daily activities were? Do you know what he was doing in custody?
Within the jail
Yes.
itself?
Yes.
No, I don't remember having detailed material on that.
Do you know what kind of books he was reading during the period of time before you saw him while he was incarcerated?
Oh, Lord. Where's she going with this?
I don't think I have had any information on the books he was reading during that time.
And when you interviewed him, you didn't interview him in his cell. You interviewed him in an interview room that was away from his cell, which is where he was living, correct?
That's right. In quite a variety of spots, in fact, in the jail, but
All right.
not in his cell.
Never in his cell.
Never in his cell.
Okay, so you were not, you couldn't go and look and see what kind of reading material he had in his cell, right?
No, I couldn't. That's right.
And did you consider the reports of Dr. Oziel in assessing Lyle Menendez?
Dr. Oziel.
I had some information on those reports. I'm trying to remember when I had access to those, and I watched a little bit of the testimony on tape of Dr. Oziel. I looked at some of the testimony that was in transcript, and I ended up deciding that there was so many questions about the accuracy of the material and about the motivation associated with that relationship that I didn't give any further attention to it.
Are you familiar with Lyle Menendez's testimony in this courtroom?
I think I've had access to most of that testimony. It came to me in bits and pieces, so I'm not sure whether I missed a segment or not.
Well, are you familiar with the fact that in his testimony, he confirmed that many of the things that Dr. Oziel said, which were beneficial to his case, were in fact said during his sessions with Dr. Oziel? Are you aware of that fact?
It's not clear to me what you're saying.
Well, objection sustained. It calls for a conclusion on the part of the witness.
Yeah. It's such a broad question that it requires. I mean, he said that he saw some of his testimony. He's not sure if he saw all of his testimony. So it's like, at which part of his testimony did he say that he was agreeing with portions? It's just, that's such a weird, broad question that is incredibly vague.
After reading Lyle Menendez's testimony, or the portions of it that
Yes.
were made available to you, did you think that you wanted to go back and look at Dr. Oziel's notes because of what Lyle Menendez had said about them during his testimony?
No, I didn't come away with that sense.
Because he knows Dr. Oziel is a total quack of a doctor, and no one should ever feel the need to go back to Dr. Oziel's notes.
I believe you indicated that you had an intelligence test for Lyle Menendez from when he was a child.
I had the results of an intelligence test. Yes, I remember, and I'm having trouble remembering if it was at 3 or 5 years of age.
Did you do any psychological testing of him?
I carried out some formal processes to see just what his reactions would be.
What test did you give him?
I gave him some subtests of the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale.
Did you give him the MMPI test?
No.
Okay. And did you determine whether or not his intelligence was average, above average, below average? What was your determination?
Yeah, I also gave him the Raven Standard Progressive Matrices. I forgot. I'm sorry. Ravens, RAVENS, Standard Progressive Matrices. Yes, the results I got indicated that he is above average in intelligence, not at the level that was shown in that early testing, but that would place him, depending on the area that you were considering, somewhere from a little above average to maybe in the top 10 to 5%, something like that.
Top 10 or 5% of the nation in intelligence?
Of individuals of his age, yes.
All right. Now, I believe you indicated then that you rejected Dr. Oziel's notes, but you did look at the psychiatric or psychological notes of Mrs. Menendez, correct?
The notes from therapists or those who had worked with Mrs. Menendez, yes.
And you didn't reject those notes, did you?
Yes, they didn't have the controversy associated with them or the questions, at least to my knowledge.
Have you ever had a patient?
They didn't have the controversy associated with those notes that were in the other notes, Dr. Oziel's notes, because they weren't taken contemporaneously. He wrote them like 2 weeks after the fact, after he had already seen other clients and had many other appointments. Oh my gosh, great, wonderful. Why does she keep asking about it? Why doesn't she let the jury just forget about Dr. Oziel entirely? It's like she insists that the jury remember just how terrible Dr. Oziel is.
Patient threatened to kill you?
No, I haven't.
How many people have you interviewed who've been incarcerated in a jail or a prison for murder?
None until this time.
So you have no experience with talking to people who are either charged with or convicted of murder. Is that correct?
No, that's right.
And how about, have you done any studies on, or have you ever interviewed people in custody for other crimes, either accused or convicted of other crimes?
No.
Have you ever done any study on the percentage of criminals who lie in order to avoid criminal responsibility?
No, I haven't done studies in that area.
So this was the first time you had ever interviewed someone in a jail facility. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, it was. I've interviewed lots of people who are dealing with a lot of stress and problems in their lives, but not people in jail.
Okay. Would you consider a capital case to be a stress-producing event?
I would expect it to be.
Okay. Now, you indicated that you've looked at lots of
Would you think
reports and that those reports help corroborate some of the findings you had pursuant to the chart, which is Exhibit 295. Do you remember testifying that it was your information that Mrs. Menendez did not want to have a child when she was pregnant with Lyle Menendez?
Yes, that she did not want to have children.
All right.
Yes, I remember that.
May I approach, please, Your Honor?
What?
With it, I showed counsel.
All right, yes.
I'm going to show you an interview with Mrs. Faith Goldsmith. I'd like to ask you if this particular interview was made available to you by the defense.
I'm not absolutely sure whether I've seen this particular interview before. I have seen interviews with Faith Goldsmith.
But you're not sure if the defense gave you that one?
I'm not absolutely certain that I had this particular one in hand. If you want me to read through the whole thing, I might have a clearer sense of it.
Well, actually, what I'm concerned with is the first line, which I've outlined to you, and I showed you before you started testifying.
Yes.
Okay, and the information contained in there may be in conflict with what your assumption is about the fact that she didn't want children, correct?
It could be in conflict if you took this statement to mean that Kitty truly wanted the child, but the fact that should this be read aloud so that people know what we're talking about?
Well, there's no objection. So, yes, why don't you read the part in pink?
Okay. This says Lyle was, and this would be then from Faith Goldsmith. Lyle was a planned pregnancy. Kitty and Jose would say they wanted a child. And that could be in conflict, or it could simply mean that Jose wanted a child, and therefore Kitty would say that she wanted the child because what Jose wanted is what Kitty would be would probably indicate was what she wanted, whether it meant that or not.
That doesn't really help the prosecution, really. I mean, that still means that based on everything that we've heard so far about the relationship and about the family dynamics in that home, like that is still entirely believable to take that and say, okay, she said she wanted a kid because that's what Jose wanted, but that's not really what she wanted.
You couldn't ask Mrs. Menendez if she truly wanted to be pregnant because she's not with us anymore, correct?
No, that's certainly true.
And you're aware of the fact that Mrs. Goldsmith testified in this court that during a certain period of time, she and her husband were best friends with Mr. and Mrs. Menendez.
That's my understanding. Excuse me. That's my understanding.
And in fact, they knew Mr. and Mrs. Menendez before Mrs. Menendez even became pregnant with Lyle Menendez, correct?
That's my understanding.
And so are you saying that you're rejecting the information contained in the report that Kitty said she wanted to become pregnant? Or are you finding another way of explaining it?
No. Well, what I'm saying is that for someone to say that Kitty said to them that she wanted to have a child would not necessarily mean that she wanted to have a child.
Yeah.
And a person saying they didn't want to have a child doesn't necessarily mean they don't want to have a child, does it?
No, you'd look for many other things. And probably there are many women who have not wanted to have a child or who have shifted in and out of that feeling. So then you would start to look at their behavior relative to that child to see if it was wanted.
Are you familiar with this book that I'm holding up, which is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders?
Yes.
Okay, and this particular book, is this in fact a compendium of all different kinds of mental disorders and diseases?
Yes, that's right.
And in order for something to be classified as a disorder or disease, isn't the way it becomes one, is it a group of psychologists and psychiatrists vote on whether or not that thing should be considered a disorder or disease?
It is that sort of process. They've added a little more strength to it recently in that they do some field studies to see that that which they have agreed on or inclined to agree on seems to actually work out in practice in some sense. But I think that you're right in terms of the general
All right.
process.
In fact, isn't it true that there are certain kinds of diseases and disorders which are periodically added in and removed from this particular manual?
That's right, yes.
Okay, so this is sort of like the Syndrome Hall of Fame, is that correct?
Sort of it's kind of a handbook, yes. It isn't comprehensive, but it does provide you with a lot of useful information about conditions.
And the reason that this book came about is because psychologists needed some way of unifying their knowledge so that they'd know what each other was talking about, right?
Exactly.
Okay, now, one of the things that's contained in this particular book is a term called malingering.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the term
Yes, I am.
malingering? All right, now, you understand that the essential feature of malingering is a production of false or grossly exaggerated symptoms motivated by external incentives such as avoiding military conscription, which is the draft, avoiding work, obtaining financial compensation, evading criminal prosecution, et cetera, et cetera. You understand that concept, right?
Yes, what they're dealing with there is the production, the creation falsely of symptoms or an exaggeration of them. And they're referring to physical symptoms, problem using limbs, problems of movement and so on, all kinds of physical symptoms. They're talking also about psychological symptoms in terms of things like having hallucinations, being so confused that you can't deal with everyday problems and so on. Yeah, the focus is on symptoms. That's correct.
All right. So a very basic form of malingering is I don't want to go to school when I'm a child and I tell my mother I have a stomach ache.
Yeah,
That's a very simple
I think that's
form.
a good example that all of us can appreciate.
Okay. Now, do you know what a forensic psychologist is?
It's my understanding a forensic psychologist is someone who specializes in doing evaluations and making judgments in regard to the cases that are going toward or are in court.
And forensic psychologists then interview people who are in custody, right?
I would think that would, yes, certainly.
And they
By the way, I really like this witness. I just wanted to say, I think that he explains things very well, very clearly. I think that he has, he's very open with his explanations when even when you can tell that the prosecutor is going down a particular route that she's trying to go down. And he follows with her down that, excuse me, down that trail. But then he deviates when he feels that he disagrees with her, which is consistent with everything that he said so far. So I really like this witness for the defense. I think he's doing a great job.
And they interview people who are involved in lawsuits who are trying to obtain certain results from their lawsuits, correct?
Yes, I would think so.
And you are not a forensic psychologist.
No, that's not my specialty.
Did you suspect malingering in this case?
I was not really dealing with symptoms and exaggerated symptoms as a major part of this case. What I did consider that is associated with the idea of malingering is whether or not the information I was getting was information that was fabricated, that was not true. And so I definitely gave consideration to that in terms of looking at the degree to which what I heard from Lyle Menendez was internally consistent as we approached it in a variety of ways, whether the information that was provided to me or that I was able to gather by going through reports and interviewing people indicated that such things like this had happened, or that the parents behaved in ways that would mean that this was something that could be believable. So I certainly was concerned about that all the way through this process, but not about symptoms.
Do you ever consider the idea that the tales that you were told by Lyle Menendez were false or grossly exaggerated?
I considered the possibility that they were,
Fairy
but
tale?
the information I had suggested that that was unlikely.
Now, I believe one of the things that you were told by Lyle Menendez was sexual abuse by his father. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And one of the ways, now, as far as the particular incident occurring, the only two witnesses would have been Lyle Menendez and his deceased father, correct?
To be present, to observe the sexual abuse, yes, that's my understanding. I don't know of anybody who had a chance to observe that occurring, and then possibly his mother too would have knowledge of it. But as you've indicated, as we both know, she is not any longer here. I believe he did talk to a cousin about it, and to an acquaintance, Donovan Goudreau.
I like how he calls him an acquaintance, not a friend, because that becomes very clear early on in the trial. Also, I wanted to point this out because this is a very good point. I mean, it could be something as simple as Kitty wanted children and she was looking forward to being a mother, but the changes father had brought out in Jose were what soured her and she blamed the kids. Absolutely. That could have happened too. The important thing here is what the communication was to the children during their upbringing, because if regardless, like what, as far as it's relevant to this case, that's what we really care about, is what was communicated to the kids. Did she show this sort of animus towards the existence of her children that can be corroborated, especially that can be corroborated by other people who are observing her behavior and observing her communication. So that's like the most important aspect here. So, I mean, you could absolutely be right about that. And that is something that is nevertheless beneficial to the defense. But that's an excellent point there.
Okay, now did you see Mr. Goudreau testify last week?
No, I didn't see him testify last week.
So you don't know where he got his information, do you?
Where
Mr. Goudreau got his information. You don't know for certain where Mr. Goudreau got his information because you didn't see him testify in court last week, correct?
No, I don't know for certain where he got his information.
Now, the cousin was Diane Vandermolen. Is that the cousin?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Did you read the testimony of Diane Vandermolen?
I believe I have read the testimony of Diane.
Okay, and are you aware of the fact that the information she gave, which corroborates the sexual abuse, was not given to the defense attorneys until their second interview with her? Are you aware of that fact?
Yes.
And are you aware of the fact that the information she gave to the defense attorneys wasn't given to them until she'd been to visit Lyle Menendez, I think, on 3 occasions in the county jail? Are you aware of that fact?
Yes, I am aware of that. That it was my understanding that those were under conditions in which that kind of communication would be unlikely to occur. But that is my understanding.
Did you have private conversations with Lyle Menendez in the jail?
Yes, most of the conversations could be considered to have been private. There was at least one occasion on which you could question whether that was private, and that's when I was in the setting that I think is available for most visitations. When you have the phone and you're talking to the person on the other side, you've got somebody sitting beside you. The person you're talking to may have somebody sitting beside him. That was the only time that I felt that there was a real question about whether we could talk confidentially or not. That occurred just on one day when the necessary paperwork wasn't in existence.
Dr. Hart, do you think people would lie to help themselves?
It's a very broad question.
People do lie to help themselves when they get in very tight places.
Would you consider being tried for a capital offense to be a tight place?
Certainly.
And do you think people lie to help those they love?
I think people do lie to help those they love.
Have you ever found in your evaluation of anyone as a psychologist that you felt that that person was malingering?
Was generating symptoms or not telling the truth?
Well, malingering as it's used in the DSM, which is creating symptoms. Did you ever think someone was telling you about symptomology?
Yes, there were occasions in which I felt that the person was exaggerating, desperately needing attention, and that sort of thing was happening, yes.
Was that person incarcerated?
No, not in a jail.
Okay. Can psychologically abused children hate their parents?
That psychologically abused children can hate their parents, yes.
And would you, I mean, there are lots of people who hate their parents, correct?
I'm not sure how many there are. There are lots of people who at one time or another hate their parents, and there are some who hate their parents pretty consistently.
All right. And so psychological abuse can be one of the origins of hating your parents, correct?
That psychological abuse could contribute to hating your parents. That's right.
And can psychologically abused children make plans to kill their parents?
Psychologically abused children, some of them would be capable of making plans to kill their parents.
Did you diagnose any kind of mental disease or defect in Lyle Menendez? In other words, did he have any kind of disorder or defect that would impair his ability to think?
He didn't have any sort of clinical syndrome. I wasn't asked to make that kind of an evaluation, but I didn't see any signs of that sort of thing. But he certainly had life experiences and had exhibited problems in problem solving and in thinking associated with those life experiences, but not to the point of being or not fitting some clinical syndrome that I have knowledge of.
Do you know what a sociopath is?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
Sustain.
Yeah. We haven't gotten into sociopathy at all.
Did you ever consider that he had any kind of personality disorder in your evaluation of him?
I gave that consideration, yes.
Did you reject that idea?
Yes.
Now, if two children are raised in the same home, but are by the same set of parents, but are raised very differently, would you expect them to have the same sort of psychological reactions?
They could have quite different ones and the same. It could be a combination of those two.
Okay.
Yeah, good answer. It's a stupid question. It deserves a stupid answer. Like, it's super broad, over broad. So yeah, they could be the same, but they could also be different. Or there could be some kind of combination between the two. That's such a non-answer, but that question is worth a non-answer. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry, that question was stupid.
You're aware of the fact that in families, for instance, a family with several children, one of them will become a criminal and the others won't.
Yes.
Okay. And you're aware of the fact that in families that the children might all be treated the same, but they all may come out differently, correct?
Well, we believe often that children are all created the same because they're in the same family. That isn't really so often the case. Usually children are treated differently within a family for a whole variety of reasons. The time when they come along in that family, how that family has changed over those periods, the characteristics that person brings. And so those could be some of the conditions that would lead to them being quite different in the way they develop. But then children also are who appear to be treated in much the same way because of the differences in their talents, temperament, and so on, and conditions outside the home. It could turn out quite differently.
I believe you indicated that when you interviewed Lyle Menendez, he did not show any hatred towards his parents. Is that correct?
That's correct. He didn't show hatred toward his parents.
Did you ever consider that by showing you hatred, that would play into the prosecution's theory that this was a killing done out of hatred, and that he didn't want to give you that kind of support when he interviewed with you?
I consider the possibility that showing hatred might be considered to have somehow led to and contributed to the crime, but the the fact that, again, approached from so many different directions and was so, and the fact that it was genuinely expressed, that his continuing love for his parents, and the fact that others who knew him and had heard him speak about his parents over and over again had not found this evidence of hatred, led me to the conclusion that that was not a major factor.
You know, when you've gone through the things that you've gone through, you know, at least that I am convinced that he's gone through, I feel like it's really hard to fake love for your parents. You know, like if you hate them, it's hard to conceal that. If you have a very strong dislike for someone, it has a tendency to show through when you are interviewing, especially when he spent, what did he say, 60 hours with him? That's a long time. That's a very long time to hold up a mask for, you know, when talking about his parents. So I you know, I don't blame Pam for asking, you know, these kinds of questions and whatnot, going there. It's part of it is her job. But at the same time, I don't think she's going to get what she wants to get out of this guy.
You said his emotions were genuinely expressed. Is that correct?
Yes, to the degree that you can read someone's emotions while you're talking to them.
Have you ever been to a movie where the acting was so moving that you
Oh my
reacted
God.
emotionally even though the story wasn't true?
Yes, I
Oh
certainly
my
have.
God.
You think you can be fooled, Dr. Hart?
Lyle is an Academy Award winning actor, is what she's trying to say. Did you know that Lyle could win an Academy Award for his performance in this trial and in all of the interviews that he did with everyone everywhere in his entire like look at I unfortunately I forgot his name, the attorney's name here, but like just seeing him smile at her question to be like, are you kidding me? It's so stupid. It's so stupid. The fact that she asked that question with a straight face is beyond me.
Could I be fooled
Yeah.
by something like that? Well, I've certainly been moved by movies,
You
by
think
people who didn't feel that, and someone could probably get me to believe that something was very important to them. They had a strong emotional reaction if we only dealt with that topic on one occasion and I didn't have other information about it.
Did you hear or did you read the testimony of Lyle Menendez that he is the one responsible for the contact wound to the back of his father's head?
I believe that I read that testimony that I came.
Well, are you aware of the fact that Lyle Menendez is responsible for the contact wound to the back of his father's head?
That's my understanding.
Do you consider that an act of love?
I consider that to be an act that was produced by years of developing fear, and that the contributions of the psychological maltreatment were the major driving forces there with the fear, and that love at that point was pushed out of the way.
Do you ever consider the fact that he might have planned the killing of his parents?
I did give thought to that, yes, consideration to whether that might have been a part of what happened.
Now, you indicated in your testimony that, in your opinion, Lyle Menendez loved his father, correct?
Yes.
Did you look at the fact that within 4 days after killing his father, he went out and bought a watch of which his father disapproved?
Yes.
I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, it's another dumb question. I guess she really wants to go there, but it's at least maybe it was a good question in 1993. Okay, you know, materialism, there's you know, there were different social factors back then in 1993. But like, come on, man.
Yes, I did. I had that information.
Okay, and did you also have the information that he, in fact, wore the watch to his father's funeral in Princeton?
Yes.
As if to stick it to him?
I knew that. I'm not sure if I knew what watch. I think he bought more than one, and I remember that he called his uncle to see if he thought that would be appropriate to wear a watch to the funeral. It's not clear to me which watch he ended up wearing.
Do you consider that an act of respect for one you love to go out
Oh my God.
4 days after you've killed them and buy an object of which they disapproved?
I didn't think, in a sense, it might actually be tied in with the love he had for his father, because the meaning I gave to that seemed to be most to fit best was that he had this strong love for his father, and the conditions that had been produced meant that he had lost his father. He no longer had this person he loved, and I think there was some anger being expressed at that point for not having it, that his father was no longer around.
You can love a parent and be angry at them at the same time. You can love a parent and do something that they disapprove at the same time. You can love a parent who is gone and be angry at them and do things that they would disapprove of because you're angry at them, or for any other number of reasons. Just like the idea that, like, oh, because his father would have disapproved of this watch and he had the gall to not only buy it but then wear it to his funeral is just so stupid. It's so stupid. It's another dumb question.
That he had ended up in this situation without this father who directed, guided so much of his life and was so important to him.
Wouldn't it be more an act of respect and love to wear his father's watch after he was dead than to go out and buy
What?
a $9,000 Rolex?
Holy Monday morning quarterbacking. Like, okay, actually maybe not, because maybe you figure this is dad's stuff. I'm not touching dad's stuff. Like that is being kept over there. I could never touch it during his lifetime. I never wanted to touch it even afterwards. You know what I mean? Like she's making all kinds of like crazy conclusions.
That could be shown as an act of love. That's right. If it wasn't, if the interpretation I gave didn't make more sense to me, and I have no knowledge of his father's watch or even its existence, so I don't know whether that was any kind of choice. But I think there was the other kind of motivation was what was involved.
Did you consider it an act of love and respect when he went out and bought a $70,000 Porsche after his father's death?
I consider that to be just an extension of what had been a lifelong pattern of not giving any real value to money and to just continuing to spend.
Well, you're aware of the fact that he had a car at the time of his father's death, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
What about the contact wound to his mother on her cheek? Did you consider that an act of love?
Oh, geez.
No, I'd have the same interpretation of that was an extension of the fear and the contribution of the psychological maltreatment he'd experienced.
I believe you indicated one of the things that you found to be corrupting about the family was the fact that the parents did the homework for their children, and that they were teaching them to cheat. Is that correct?
Well, it was corrupting in that way because you have these people who are the ones kind of guiding you through life. This is the way you do things, cheating openly for you. And you also, it's corrupting in that it's denying the person the opportunity to develop some of the competencies he ought to be developing in that case. The work habits, the fuller understanding of the material, to be able to then carry himself through other parts of his life where he will be expected to actually do things on his own. So it's corrupting at least in those two ways.
Have you done any studies on the percentage of professional athletes who cheated in order to get through school?
No, I haven't done any studies in that area.
Do you think that all of the athletes at Indiana University and Purdue University do their own schoolwork?
Whoa, that's quite an accusation.
I can't really make a judgment about that. I think that probably from what I've heard about, I mean, this is just speculation about the way that
objection. Like I would be interrupting with an objection as soon as he says this is just speculation. I would be objecting as to speculation.
athletes in different universities and are helped.
This is the speculation.
Sustained.
Yes, thank you.
Objection sustained.
So the
Thank
answer
you.
is you don't know whether or not the athletes at the schools at which you teach do all of their own work, correct?
I don't know
Objection
whether
asked and
those
answered.
athletes do all of their own work, part of their own work, none of their own work.
I believe you indicated one of the factors you found compelling was the fact that Lyle Menendez had no independence, that he was totally
But
controlled
he
by
had
his
such
parents.
a low level of independence, of autonomy. That's right.
Are you aware of the fact that in 1986 his family moved to California and left him behind in Princeton to live on his own?
Yes, he was left behind initially, I think, living in the family home and with the contacts with his relatives, with the frequent telephone calls and the visits, and also probably with a high level of confidence which had been established earlier, that when Lyle had some particular need, when he came up against something he couldn't handle, that he was going to call home because you knew that you needed to clear things in that family.
Are you aware of the fact that in the fall of 1987, he attended Princeton University and lived on the Princeton campus?
Fall of 1987, yes.
And that is normal behavior for someone of that age to go to college and live on campus, correct? There's nothing abnormal about that, correct?
About living on campus?
Yes.
No.
All right. Now, are you also aware of the fact that between 1987 and 1989, that he went to Europe twice without his parents?
Yes.
You're aware of the fact that he traveled to Australia to play tennis?
Yes.
Okay, and one of the trips to Europe was a trip with his girlfriend, Jamie. Were you aware of that?
Yes, that's right. I understand that.
All right, and so when he was on this trip in Europe, he was away from his parents.
Yes. In truth, I don't think there was ever a time when Lyle could be away from his parents because he would be carrying them in his head and his feelings all the time. But physically, he was away from his parents. That's right.
Do you consider traveling alone in Europe without your parents to be an act of independence?
He was traveling with somebody.
With his
wasn't he?
girlfriend?
Yes, that's right. And he was making his way by stringing rackets or something like that. So that was a case in which, yes, he was showing some independence.
Were you aware of the fact that during the period of time after 1986, when he was no longer living permanently with his family, that he had a family credit card with a $250,000 credit limit?
I think I was under the impression that he actually had a family credit card even before that.
The credit limit is an indication of Jose and Kitty's credit. So like this is it seems to me, I mean, no kid at his age who has never had any kind of real employment is ever going to be given that kind of credit limit, even in today's day with inflation and all that kind of stuff. Like that's insane. So that very clearly is a family credit card that he was put onto. The fact that there is a credit limit of that amount doesn't speak to how much he was actually allowed to spend on that card.
That was one of the ways that he took care of buying the things that he needed to, and which also doesn't require that you actually take care of money, that you're responsible for money. You just have that card and you use it.
Do you consider that to be abuse to give your child a credit card with a $250,000 limit? Is that child abuse?
To have given them that card, it's giving them something that they haven't been very well prepared to use, and which on occasion, as my understanding, he would overspend. And on the surface, it looks like an act of generosity, I suppose. But what you buy with your credit card can be checked on. And in Lyle's life, there was sure knowledge that if you stepped very far beyond any particular line, you were going to come up against a wall. So in that case, he generally probably could be allowed to have such a card.
So it was abusive?
In and of itself, no, it's not abusive to give him that credit card.
But it certainly
Were you
didn't
aware of the
help him
fact that while
prepare
he
for
was at Princeton
adulthood.
University, he had a vehicle to use?
I believe I knew that. I had not really thought much about it. But
So the fact that he was at Princeton University, 3,000 miles away from his parents' home, that he had a credit card that he could use to take care of his needs, that he could sign at the student store
Yes.
to take care of his needs, and he had a vehicle and was living at times with a woman named Jamie Pizarczyk, of whom his parents did not approve, That was not independence, is that correct?
Well, he was always tied closely to his mother and father in regard to what he was doing. There were certain areas in which they allowed him some freedom of movement, but which they to which they could apply control when they wanted to. One of the areas, at least from his father, was some freedom with his girlfriends, even though his mother, was strongly critical of them. But yes, that's my understanding. But there are so many instances in which someone was checking on him, or he was checking back at home to see that what he was doing was okay, that I would not consider him to be a free agent under that situation, or to be displaying autonomy to the degree or independence that you would expect for a university student.
Was there any physical or legal reason that Lyle Menendez couldn't have just told his father to keep his money and he could go off and get a job as a tennis pro at a country club somewhere? Was there any reason he couldn't do that?
Object vague as to time.
It's just a,
After 1986, when he was 18 years old and his parents had moved to California and he was on the East Coast, was there any physical or legal reason that you could find in your evaluation which prevented Lyle Menendez from telling his father to take his money and Lyle would go live his own life?
There was no legal reason, and there's no physical reason, and unless you consider the possibility of some kind of physical punishment from his father, or some or being in danger of physically in danger from some act from his father, or you consider this bio or psychological, neurological sort of interaction that you were referring to earlier. But that isn't, those are not the conditions that would be most powerful in limiting Lyle Menendez's freedom to make that choice. The conditions that would be most powerful in his life were those that he had lived with for so long, that indicated his father was a power to be reckoned with well beyond his capabilities, and that he needed to do what his father wanted, and that there really was no way of escaping his father unless he was willing not to be considered his father's son, this person important in his father's life. And that was, one of the things of greatest priority to him.
Dr. Hart, my question to you was whether or not there was a physical or legal reason which prevented him from telling his father to take his money and he'd go on his way. You added in a great many words after answering the question. Is there a reason that you did that?
Yes, I thought it was important to understand the factors that actually would keep him from making that choice, rather than the ones that would ordinarily be considered without going into any depth in the matter.
That was I'm sorry. This is another dumb question. It's another dumb question because she's like, you just added a bunch of extra information that I didn't want. Why did you do that? What is the point? Like, what is it? What I want to know is, what was she trying to get out of him? What was her ideal response from him to her question? Because the only thing that I can think of is for him to now have an opportunity to explain why he wanted to give all of that extra context that he just gave that she didn't want, which is explaining basically the question that you're asking is a little bit too narrow to give an accurate picture of what it was that was, at play here. So okay, legally and physically, those are two aspects. But what about psychologically and all of this other stuff to explain his behavior? Oh my gosh.
Are you an advocate for either side?
Oh Lord.
For either side.
Are you an advocate for Lyle Menendez?
I'm an advocate for children in general. In regard to Lyle Menendez, I'm an advocate of the truth, of being a participant in seeing that justice is done, that his life is sufficiently understood so that those people who are going to make a decision about him will be able to take that into consideration.
What if you weren't told the truth? Would that make a difference in your opinion as to your advocacy for Lyle Menendez?
If I were not told the truth and knew I had not been told the truth, then I would not be presenting that information. I would not automatically be an advocate for him or for or against him.
Did you Did you talk to Lyle Menendez about the acts the week of his parents' killings? Did you talk to him about those events?
Before he answers that, sorry, I nothing about this witness sounds like an advocate. There's nothing about him that seems like somebody who has a particular like world view that everything either fits into an A framework or a B framework, and like this is like a very blunt sort of subject. He's been very nuanced in his treatment of this whole everything here involved in his testimony.
We talked about that week, yes.
All right. And did you talk to him about the actual killing of his parents?
Yes, we talked about those events too.
Were you aware of the fact that when he called the police during the 911 call that he lied to the police? They asked him, are the people there that did this? And he said, they're gone.
Yes, I remember it that way too.
Okay, you remember the fact that he lied to the police while under what he would say was a great deal of stress, correct?
Well, I'm going to assume that he was under stress and continued to be under stress after that, yes.
Would you say he would have been under stress even if he planned to kill his parents?
I would think he would be under a great deal less stress, and maybe not much. I wouldn't be able to gauge exactly the amount, but it would be my judgment that he would be under a lower degree of stress if he had planned it than if it had happened as described.
Are you aware of the fact that when Lyle Menendez talked to the police shortly after the 911 call, that he lied to the police as well about his participation in the killings of his parents? Are you aware of that fact? I
don't remember the exact words, but he certainly didn't tell them that he participated.
Well, you understand he told them he'd gone to a movie that he hadn't gone to.
Yes, I'm remembering that. Yeah.
Did you know that because he didn't immediately admit to what he did, and because he lied about XYZ, that therefore he's a lying liar who lies, who never has said an honest word in his entire life? That's really what she wants to get to.
And you remember that he also told the police that if the murder had anything to do with his parents' associates, it would have been his father's business associates because they were seedy people. Do you remember that?
Well, I remember in his testimony that he mentioned from time to time other possibilities, but my reading of it was that he usually, if not always, sort of discarded those then after having mentioned them, as he would sort of throw this idea and that idea out.
Are you aware of the fact that after the killings of his parents, he hired bodyguards, and that he told one of the bodyguards that the mafia had done the killing?
Yes, I think I was aware of all that information, which to me even sort of strengthened the idea that he was concerned about the possibility that he might have said something that might have been misunderstood to point a finger in that direction, and that might somehow mean that he was in trouble.
Did you ever...
Excuse me. Donna, can we approach for a minute?
Yes.
Dr. Hart, you're aware of the fact that Lyle Menendez lied to a number of individuals after his parents' killings, correct? Are you aware of that fact or not?
I'm aware of the fact that he did not tell the truth about what had happened to a number of individuals. Yeah.
And in fact, he didn't, well, strike that. Did you consider the fact that he lied about his participation in the killings in order to avoid being caught? Did you consider that as a possibility?
That he lied afterward about what he had done in order that he would not be caught and not go to jail for this? Certainly I did, yes.
All right. Now, did you ever consider that he might lie to you so that you would help him avoid responsibility for the crime?
Yes, I considered that possibility, and I took that into consideration when I looked at all the different types of information that I had.
And this is see, here's the thing. I mean, we talk about inconsistencies all the time on this channel, right? Especially when we're watching trials, when we're analyzing people's testimony, and someone's confronted by some sort of inconsistency. And not every inconsistency is automatically a death knell to that person's credibility, right? Because there have been people who have been found out to be completely inconsistent and then on cross-examination just absolutely just destroyed in their credibility. Then there are those who are able to explain it in a way that is logical, makes sense, and most people can understand and even empathize with. So, the question is, the inconsistencies which are present in this case with the brothers and what they initially told the police, what they initially told other people, and then ultimately what they came forward and admitted to, the question is, do these inconsistencies like stack up in various ways? Are they explained in a way that you can understand and appreciate and not look at them and their credibility in a way that is completely undermined? Or is that something that is that you can't trust anything that they say afterwards? Obviously, prosecution wants everyone to believe and to conclude that this means that they're lying liars who lie about absolutely everything. There are a lot of people, though, who disagree, because the fact that that there are other things that they have testified to that are beneficial to their case, of course, that are corroborated by other people. And, having these experts also is testifying to it is helpful for the jury to understand how these consistencies or inconsistencies may or may not help or hurt these people. I don't know. So I don't know. I definitely, I get what Pam is trying to do. It's what any prosecutor would try to do in a case like this. I mean, in any kind of a case, right? If there's any kind of inconsistencies present, it's hammer in on them until the end of time, until the jury gets that, okay, yes, their credibility is shot. But I don't know that it works in this case.
You rejected that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Now,
right.
are you aware of the testimony in this case by Lyle Menendez and his brother Erik Menendez about the fact that the reason they had to go to San Diego to purchase the guns is because they'd gone to the Big Five in Santa Monica and they couldn't buy handguns there?
Yes, I am aware of that material, that testimony. Yeah.
And are you aware of the fact that that particular store didn't even really sell handguns?
That's my understanding, that it didn't have handguns that use bullets. It might have had handguns that were pellet guns, many of which look, to me at least, they look just like the other guns. But beyond that, I have no idea of what they have in a Big Five store.
Do you think maybe he just lied about the fact that he went to the Big Five in order to try to explain why he'd end up in San Diego with false identification buying shotguns 2 days before the murders?
Well,
Did you consider that a possibility?
the possibility that he might have lied about that to give justification for going to San Diego.
Correct.
That didn't make much sense to me as a lie that would be very useful to anybody. So I didn't give much weight to it.
I believe you indicate, okay, let me just ask you this. Is there any fact about the murders, the killings themselves or the week before the killings, that is inconsistent with your version that Lyle Menendez is telling the truth? Is there anything that you know about what happened before, during, and after the killings which is inconsistent with your idea of why Lyle Menendez did this?
No, there isn't any fact of any significance that comes to my mind or has that doesn't make sense within the context of what I've come to understand about his life.
So every single fact that you know about the homicide before and after makes sense within your own understanding of the psychological factors,
yes,
correct?
Is understandable within those, within that set of information. That's right.
I believe you indicated at the end of your direct examination that you considered this Lyle Menendez's case to be severe psychological abuse. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Did you ever consider the fact of his behavior when he was a child? In other words, did you ever consider that maybe he was naughty as a child on occasion?
Certainly, yes. Most children are on occasion.
Did you ever consider the fact that the information being given to you was given to you and it was all bad? Did you ever think, gee, there's nothing good here?
The information about what?
The information given to you by the defense attorney, the friends, the relatives, the information from Lyle Menendez, all of it gave very negative information about the.
Do you ever consider that everyone is lying to you? Every single person you talk to is lying to you? Do you ever consider the possibility that it's a massive conspiracy among all of the witnesses and the attorneys and everyone, absolutely everyone? What a question.
The parents, correct?
Well, there was some information that wasn't negative about the parents, and some that was sort of a borderline. It had many different meanings to it.
Do you consider someone who's been severely psychologically abused capable of becoming a superior tennis player?
Certainly.
And do you think someone who's been severely psychologically abused can attend a university like Princeton?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think a person who's been severely psychologically abused can plan to and execute a plan to kill their parents?
Is it possible for someone to do that kind of planning?
Yes.
It would depend on the nature of the psychological abuse that they had experienced. For some, it would be possible. For those who have little to no confidence in their ability to do that kind of planning, it would become less likely.
Now, you say this was a severe case. Have you ever analyzed children who've been used as child prostitutes?
No, I don't believe that I have.
Would you consider a child being sold into prostitution a severe form of psychological abuse?
I would consider it to be a severe form of abuse, and certainly would have strong psychological abuse elements within that.
Have you ever interviewed or examined a child who's been locked in a closet in their parents' house for 3, 4, 5 years, and the neighbors didn't even know there was a child living at the house? Have you ever had that kind of situation?
No, that would also be a severe form.
You think that's severe?
Is she going to the conclusion that if it's not that bad, then it's not abuse? If that's where she's going, that's not a good route.
Your psychological abuse? All right. Do you think that children who are beaten on a daily or a weekly basis are subject to severe psychological abuse as a result of their beatings?
Yes, they would be.
Have you ever interviewed children or seen children who have sores on their bodies because they live in a home that has 2 feet of trash on the ground?
Well, I don't know about the amount of trash on the ground, but I've seen those kinds of sores, yes.
Have you ever seen children who were starved?
I've seen children who were underfed directly. I've certainly seen material on children who were starved.
And this is severe
Michelle Petrovich, did you foresee Ruby Frankie? That's how it feels, right? Like it's weird. It's wild. It's wild that like yes. I'm sure that the LA County DA's office has seen crazy stuff like that and probably even worse in terms of child abuse. So I'm wondering if she's just comparing this to like cases that she's seen in the past and she's just like, well, this is nothing in comparison. But that doesn't mean that it's not child abuse. That doesn't mean that child abuse did not happen in this case. The fact that it's not as bad, like this should not be like the trauma Olympics, right? That if it's not the worst, like if it's not the worst thing in the world that you've ever seen, then it's not abuse. Like that can't possibly be the conclusion that she's going for, because that's not a good conclusion to try to convince a neutral jury about whether or not abuse happened here. It's just
psychological abuse. Is that correct, Lyle Menendez's case?
Oh, yes, this is severe psychological abuse for a great number of factors. The sheer mass of the incidents, the fact that they went across all age levels, the fact that all of the different forms of psychological abuse are represented, the extremes of some of those, the pervasive nature of them, and for many other reasons, too.
Do you feel it necessary to justify your position by including these things in your answers?
Oh, I thought you were wanting me to tell you why.
Objection, argumentative. That one should have gotten an objection for arguing with him, because that was just her being combative with the witness.
Yeah, I thought it was severe psychological maltreatment.
Okay.
All right, let's take our recess and we'll resume promptly at 3:15. Don't discuss the matter. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see everybody back here at 3:15. And the jury is back and we'll resume with the examination of the witness. This will be redirect examination.
Thank you.
Dr. Hart,
Yes.
Mrs. Bazanich
redirect.
asked you a number of questions about whether you believed the information that you were told by Lyle Menendez.
Yes.
Was the accuracy or the reliability of that information something that was of concern to you?
Yes, it was throughout the process.
And what steps did you take to try to determine that that information you were receiving was accurate?
Well, first of all, to make sure that in all the ways that it was approached in communicating with Lyle, that it was consistent, held together in all the different ways he might describe his life or tell me about incidents and situations. And then certainly to look at the information that was available from interviews and that was produced by my interviews that would describe conditions under which someone had seen some of these conditions in his life or had knowledge of them, direct knowledge through observation, or had information about Lyle's parents or that would indicate whether or not they were people who might behave in such a manner.
If you excluded from your consideration everything that Lyle Menendez personally told you and relied only on the testimony that was presented in this court, the witness interviews that you read, the witness interviews you conducted, the medical records, the school records, the psychiatric records, would you be able to make a determination as to whether he had been psychologically maltreated during the course of his life?
Yes, the information that was available from other sources indicated that that he had experienced psychological maltreatment. A fuller understanding of it was gained by having his perspectives too, his experiences as he told them.
Do you testify in court for a living?
No,
Have you ever testified in a criminal case before?
no.
Have you worked very hard to gain respect among your colleagues in the community in which you work?
I believe I have, yes.
And do you have an international reputation?
Yes.
Would you be here testifying if you didn't believe the information was accurate?
And no, I wouldn't be here testifying to my opinion as I've given it, to the information provided, if I didn't believe it. As you said, I've worked a long time to become a person that people can rely on and who can help people to understand the treatment that children experience. And to be able to do that, you have to deal with information honestly and as objectively as you can.
Is that what you've done here?
Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
All right.
Dr. Hart,
Oh,
Lyle Menendez did discuss with you, did we not, the events, not only leading up to, but the events of the killing of his parents, correct?
We discussed those events, yes.
And you took that into account in judging his believability, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And after considering everything he told you, you still believe him, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
Nothing further.
okay. All right. So that's the end of this witness here. And let me get some questions. 1 second here. Okay. Let me get some questions here that I saved up during this testimony. There were only a few, really. Okay. This is a little bit of a non sequitur, but I can still answer it here. Carolyn V, will we do anything about the Boeing whistleblower who died before the last day of his testimony? I know that's been it's not a brand new subject, but that's something that, yeah, if you guys are interested in, I can definitely talk about it. For sure. So thank you for mentioning that one. Let me just really quick write it down. so that I don't forget when I get up from my desk after the stream. Tish, can you answer a quick question about Ruby Frankie? She asked for a lawyer, but then they kept asking her questions instead of getting her a lawyer. Can they do that? It wasn't wrongdoing. So that's another question about Ruby Frankie. I definitely want to answer that for sure. I have thoughts on it. I'm going to answer it tomorrow, however, because that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about in the evidence dump that came out in that case. So tomorrow for sure. I'm leaning more and more towards doing a live stream tomorrow. So I'll be putting out some social media, some posts about that. I think today, before the end of the day, I'll put something out for expectations for tomorrow, so that you guys can join me and we can talk about that case and go over some of the conversations that were had and the journal entries that are just awful. But we will not be going over any of the images of the children and their injuries or anything like that, because I don't want to be doing some trauma tourism in this case, especially when it comes to children. Crystal Desaro also questioned, didn't the older boy lose most of his hair because of stress? So they claimed he's got it. Yeah, he has it. I know other folks in the chat answered this already, but he does have a hairpiece on his head now. At one point, that was actually the catalyst to everything coming out, was when his mom ripped it off of his head in front of Erik. Erik had no idea that his brother was balding. I think he started balding at age 14, age 15. I don't know if it's because of stress. I don't know if it's because of genetics. But he started to bald very, very, very prematurely. I don't know that I've heard of anyone balding that early. I mean, I've seen people in college, after 18, but that's like the earliest that I've ever seen it. And at that point, not quite necessitating. It's like it's usually just receding, but like not necessitating something like a hairpiece. At that point, he had a full-on hairpiece that he was wearing every single day. And at this point, I think he's gone completely bald. I don't know that there's been an explanation as to whether that was stress or genetics or what have you. But there certainly is an implication that it could be because of stress, for sure. All right, let's get on to the next one here. This is okay. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Let me get this shared screen here. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay. We are not going to be able to get through all of his testimony because this is quite long. Well, first off, his testimony, even on Court TV's website, is in two parts. So and the first part is like 4 hours. Minus about 30 minutes of them arguing outside the presence of the jury. So we're going to watch the next like hour and 17 minutes of testimony. And then we'll probably call it quits after that, of course, with any questions that folks might have. But yeah, so we won't be getting through all of his testimony, but this should be interesting also.
John Robert Conte, C-O-N-T-E.
Dr. Conte, what is your profession
I'm a professor of social work
and where?
at the University of Washington in Seattle.
How long have you been a professor up there?
4 years.
And did you teach somewhere before that?
I taught at the University of Chicago for about 9 years and the University of Illinois for 2 prior to that.
And you have a bachelor's, master's, and PhD, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
And in addition to teaching, do you have a clinical practice?
I have a part-time clinical practice between a day and a day and a half a week. About half of that practice is devoted to the treatment of children, adolescents, and adults with trauma histories, and about half is devoted to forensic social work.
And when you say treatment of children with and adolescents with trauma injuries, what are you talking about?
Psychological trauma, primarily child abuse, although on occasion I have people who have adult victimization or other kinds of psychological traumas. But primarily I specialize in that part of my practice in the treatment of either children who are abused or adults who were abused in childhood.
Now, if you're treating adults who are abused in childhood, are these people who revealed their abuse in childhood, or they are revealing their abuse in their adulthood?
Most reveal their abuse sometime in adulthood. It's the rare client that I've seen that has revealed in childhood and then also is now coming into treatment in adulthood, although that does happen.
And the adults you're treating, are these people who are young adults in their 20s, or is there a range of age?
It varies from year to year. I've had quite elderly women come into treatment. I've had quite young adults and teenagers. It varies, some middle age.
Is it rare that someone would have waited till they were 20 or 30 or 40 to reveal abuse?
No, it's quite common.
How long have you had a clinical practice?
Well, the 4 years I've been in Washington and then it was more part-time the times that I was in Illinois, 4 or 5 years while in Illinois. The university allows about a day a week, excluding the summers when I don't work for the university, to be engaged in non-university activities.
And you said you also do some forensic work.
Yes.
Is that correct? What do you mean by that?
Well, forensic social work is social work that has legal implications. About half of my forensic work is personal injury, where a victim usually of some kind of sexual assault, childhood sexual abuse, is suing either the offender or the person responsible for the abuse. And my task is to evaluate the impact of that abuse and help the court determine what rehabilitation is necessary to take away the psychological effects of that abuse.
So he's getting into the forensics of whether they can tell if there was this essay that happened. Interesting.
I also do some criminal sexual assault work where someone is charged perhaps with a sex crime against a child. I've done that work both primarily for the prosecution. I've worked on one defense case.
Now, when you say primarily for the prosecution, is this where someone is arrested and charged with child abuse and you're helping the district attorney prosecute that person?
Yes.
And how often have you done that?
I haven't really counted, but maybe a half a dozen times, primarily for prosecution, once as a defense witness.
And yet, just watch Pam go up there and be like, "Sir, are you an advocate? Are you an advocate for the defense here?"
And have you done other work for the defense in the criminal setting?
I've done some defense work where child abuse is a mitigating factor in a violent crime, such as this case. Trying to think, I've probably done about 6 of those over my career, testifying once for the prosecution, twice for the defense. And then I was involved in doing an evaluation in a case for the defense where my ultimate opinion was not helpful, so I never testified for the defense.
You mean the defense hired you and after you did your evaluation, they didn't like your conclusions?
They didn't like it or it wasn't helpful.
Okay. And so they never called you as a witness?
Yes.
In addition to the teaching, the clinical work, and the forensic work you've described, do you have other activities related to your profession? Do you write?
Yes. Part of being a university professor is to be involved in scholarship and in other activities. And I have done research and published generally in the area of childhood sexual abuse and interpersonal violence.
When you say interpersonal violence, what are you referring to?
Talking primarily about family violence. I edit the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, which also publishes scientific material that is not family violence. It might be stranger assaults or rape or that kind of thing. But I don't do research in that area myself.
Now, what's it mean to be an editor of this journal?
Well, the editor is essentially responsible for the management of the publication of scientific articles so that academics, primarily in the United States, although we also draw from other countries, will do some research. They will submit an article. I will review it when it comes in, identify other academics, other scholars, other researchers who have expertise in that area, and then we send that manuscript for a blind review, meaning that the person reading it doesn't know who wrote it. They review the article, determine whether the methodology is sufficient to support the conclusions that were made. Often they will make suggestions that will improve the scientific presentation of the results. They send that back to me. And then as editor, I take those comments and my own reading of the manuscript into consideration and then either accept it or accept it with revisions or reject it. If it's accepted with revisions, then I interact primarily through the mails with the author, helping them make the changes that the peer review process has designed.
Who receives the Journal of Interpersonal Violence? What readership is it designed for?
Well, it's designed primarily for other researchers and scientists, policymakers, and some practitioners who understand or want to read research in a particular area. But it is a scientific journal, so it's intended primarily for the social and behavioral scientists who work in interpersonal violence.
And if a journal starts publishing articles that don't measure up scientifically, does that affect the reputation of the journal itself?
Well, it certainly affects the reputation of the journal.
So is there an effort to make sure that it's the highest quality of research and writing that is presented through these materials?
Yes. I don't think so much to protect the name of the journal as it is to assure that the knowledge which is disseminated to the field is of the highest quality. So both the editorial board and then also scientists who review have an obligation to science to be sure that what gets published is the highest quality possible.
Yeah, but let's be real. There is an aspect of like self-protection there. I mean, and reputation protection. I mean, that it makes sense. I mean, what he's saying is probably also correct, you know, caring, of course, about the actual science and the information that you're putting out there and making sure that you're responsible for what you put out there. But reputation kind of also goes hand in hand with that. So, you know, okay. All right.
Do people in your profession rely on the materials in these journals?
Yes.
And you indicated you're the editor of the Journal of Interpersonal Violence. You're also the editor of something called Violence Update. Is
Yes.
that correct? What is that?
Violence Update is a monthly newsletter which is designed for another important community, not the scientific community, but the practitioner community, people who work directly in various aspects of interpersonal violence. We publish somewhat less technical book reviews and main articles that summarize research, the kinds of things that people who work on the front lines of interpersonal violence need to know to do a good job. So it's actually published by the same publisher, but it's an effort to reach the practitioner community rather than the scientific community.
And who comprises the practitioner community? By your definition, the front line that receives the Violence Update.
Well, we have several kinds of data on that. We have data based on where people work. So people who work in child abuse and domestic violence are the primary subscribers. We also have it by discipline. Social work and psychology, lawyers and law enforcement are the third group. And then medicine is probably a fourth group in terms of the discipline of the people who subscribe. We have all of those professions represented also on the editorial board, so they help make policy decisions about what should be published and that kind of thing.
When you say law enforcement, are you talking about prosecutorial agencies or police agencies or?
Primarily prosecutors, some police, some child protection. I don't know that we have any individual CPS workers, but I know we have some departments of child protection that subscribe.
Now, in terms of research that you have personally conducted, have you been responsible for various research programs?
Yes.
And have they dealt primarily with the disclosure, intervention, analysis of effects, et cetera, of child abuse?
Yes, primarily childhood sexual abuse. I've also done federally funded research on the prevention of childhood sexual abuse.
And have you done some research funded by a district attorney's office in Alabama?
Actually, I've done some research in conjunction with the district attorney's office in Huntsville, Alabama. That was not funded by that department. It was funded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It was a study of effects of abuse and intervention services that were provided to abused kids.
In addition to being an editor on 2 of these journals, have you yourself submitted articles for the type of peer review that you've described and had them published?
Yes.
And if your CV indicates that there's approximately 42 of them, would that be?
I think that's
Close.
probably a somewhat older CV. I think it's a little more than that now.
And what areas have you published in?
Primarily in childhood sexual abuse, professional practices, validating allegations of abuse. The major trends I think that I've been interested in are abuse effects. I've been interested in professional practices, especially practices around how you know whether a child has been abused. And then I've also written some about society and professional difficulty in believing that abuse takes place.
You said you've written in the area of how you determine whether abuse has taken place.
Yes.
Is that correct? Is that designed to give people some sort of structure in which to evaluate the information?
Well, it's designed to provide a structure, and in some ways it's designed to help people who make that decision understand the complexity of making that decision. There's been quite a bit of effort in mental health and social service to develop systems, checklists, and tests and procedures that make it easier theoretically to know whether a child has been abused. And most of those systems, they tend actually to be used by the defense. Most of those systems don't have a whole lot of scientific support. And so I've done a lot to try to caution people in the field to be careful of the over-reliance on these systems. And also help disseminate some of the research on especially children as witnesses, which suggests that probably the best indicator of what's happened in a sexual abuse case is what the victim says happened within some parameters. But to try to get people away from using these tests that don't have much reliability or validity.
In fact, have you done some teaching in that area?
I've done quite a bit of lecturing and training in the area of validating allegations of abuse at state and some international conferences, yes.
And did you recently do some training in Alaska?
Within the last 4 or 5 years, I was on a 3-person training team that included a prosecutor, a physician, and myself as the social service mental health representative to train every judge in the state of Alaska on child sexual abuse. There are a large number, looked like about 30 in the room.
30 judges.
Looked like it, yeah.
No, we haven't discussed it.
And when you were training them, the judges in Alaska, was it about just to educate them about sexual abuse generally, or what area was it focused on?
It was primarily on sexual abuse, and my task was to talk about some of the research areas that support determining whether or not a child has been abused, and again, to talk about some of the dangers of some of these structured procedures, tests that have been developed.
It's interesting because it's like he has such a history of working alongside prosecution and like, you know, instructing all of the judges in all of Alaska. Like that's very interesting. He's got some very strong credibility that he's starting off with by going through his background here. It's very interesting.
Are you also active on committees and boards in your field?
Yes, I'm trying to cut back, but yes.
And have you served as the president of the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children?
I was the first president of the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, and then was off the board for a while and have now been reelected and am the chair of the Ethics Task Force for APSAC.
APSAC is the short name.
For the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, yes.
And what does APSAC do?
APSAC is a professional society which is devoted to the needs of professionals who work in the area of child abuse, so that they may more effectively respond to the problem of child abuse. APSAC publishes a newsletter. We have an annual conference. We have task force that try to develop guidelines, for example, in the evaluation of abused kids or in psychological maltreatment. My task force has the responsibility of developing the professional code of ethics for people who work in the child abuse area.
Have you also served on the Criminal and Violent Research Review Committee for the National Institute of Mental Health?
I served for 4 years on that committee. That committee is essentially it is the peer review process for funding of research by the National Institute of Mental Health in the area of antisocial and violent behavior. And our responsibility was to review proposals for technical merit and then to advise NIMH about whether proposals met certain standards of technical merit. There are a few other committees, but
Any of note that you'd like to?
well, I'm on the advisory board of the National Resource Center on Childhood Sexual Abuse in Huntsville, Alabama, which currently has a contract to develop a national training program.
National training program for whom?
For mental health, social service, and some law enforcement personnel. It's a 3-part course, but it deals with the identification and recognition and treatment of childhood sexual abuse. I just finished a term on the panel on child abuse and neglect research for the National Academy of Sciences, which was charged by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services with reviewing existing research on child abuse and neglect and developing a research agenda for the next decade for research on child abuse and neglect. And so as part of that panel, we reviewed child abuse research in a number of different areas and had review papers written and that kind of thing. And that report is just about to be released to the public.
In addition to these activities, do you also make presentations at conferences?
Yes.
And what types of conferences have you made presentations at?
Well, most conferences in the child abuse area are multidisciplinary. So I've made presentations and the annual meeting in San Diego, for example, that Children's Hospital Child Protection Center puts on, the Huntsville conference every year. I do some regional conferences. A few weeks ago was in Louisville, Kentucky for the Department of Mental Health. I've last year presented at the Law Society in Melbourne, Australia. So some national and some international, and then some sort of regional conferences in the area, different areas of childhood sexual abuse.
Now, these conferences are attended by other professionals, I take it.
Most of the conferences, I have done some single discipline, like some years I've been at the American Psychological Association, some years I've been at the National Association of Social Workers annual conference, but most of the conferences in child abuse are multidisciplinary. So there'll be psychologists and social workers and physicians and some attorneys.
And if I tell you that your CV has approximately 125 listed that you've presented at since 1987, does that sound about right?
I have no idea. I hope my wife doesn't hear that.
I think she knows. Dr. Conte, You were asked to review the facts of this case, is that correct?
Yes.
When was it that you first became involved?
I had a telephone call from you and spoke to you sometime shortly after or right around the end of January 1992.
And what was the task that you undertook?
You asked me essentially to conduct a assessment or investigation. You told me that you were involved in this case, and I'd heard a little bit about it in the press, and you told me that you wanted someone who could come in and look at the information that you were getting and help you understand what in fact this information might mean.
And did you agree to do that?
I did.
And since that time, have you received a large amount of materials to review?
Yes.
And included in those materials you received, were there over 100 interviews of various witnesses?
There were a large number. I didn't count them, but there was a very large number, yes.
And were these interviews of individuals conducted by both the prosecution and by the defense?
Yes, primarily the defense, but there were some prosecution interviews.
And did you review the testimony of Lyle Menendez in this trial?
Yes,
And did you review other testimony in this trial?
I've tried, yes.
Did you receive and review all medical records that were available for Lyle Menendez?
I believe they were all yes.
And school records?
Yes,
Did you receive records of therapy conducted by 3 different doctors for Kitty Menendez?
2 or 3, yes.
Dr.
One
Hart?
of those, I believe, may have been an evaluation. It wasn't a therapy, but it was a psychiatric evaluation.
Did you have access to some psychological testing that was done of Kitty Menendez?
Yes,
And did you in fact have that testing rescored?
yes,
Did you look at family photographs?
some,
Did you look at crime scene photographs?
yes,
Did you look at autopsy photographs?
yes,
Did you receive police reports with regard to the crime scene and the investigation?
yes.
Once you had received this information, did you proceed to make some decisions about the people to whom you wish to speak?
I made decisions about who I was going to speak to. I didn't necessarily make them after reviewing all of that material, but I made it at various points in the process, yes.
And did you interview Lyle Menendez?
Yes,
Where did you interview him?
the LA County Jail.
And how many hours did you spend with him?
Well, about 60.
Do you live in California?
No,
Where do you live?
Seattle.
How many trips to Los Angeles did you make to interview Lyle Menendez?
I don't know the number of trips. I interviewed Lyle on 13 different occasions. Some of those occasions would have been on the same trip. I haven't really broken it out by trip. It's probably 6 or 7 trips, I would imagine.
Did you interview his brother, Erik Menendez?
Yes.
And how long did you interview Erik Menendez?
Can I
for?
look at my notes?
Yes.
I saw Erik on 3 occasions between February and December 92 for about 7 hours.
Which other witnesses did you interview?
Well, I interviewed Diane Vandermolen on 2 occasions, once in August 92 in Denver and once in February of this year here in LA for somewhere over 8 hours. I interviewed Alan Anderson on 2 occasions in Chicago, once in June and once in July 1993 for about 8 hours. I made 1 trip to New Jersey where I interviewed Lyle's first girlfriend, Stacy Feldman, for about 2 hours, and then spent about 7 hours with the Baralt family,
Is that
3 of Lyle's cousins and his aunt and uncle.
Is that Aunt Terry and Uncle Carlos?
Yes.
And their children?
I also interviewed Joan,
Joan Vandermolen?
yes,
Is that
and Pat Anderson, Maria Mendez, who is Lyle's grandmother, Marta Cano, his aunt,
Interesting.
over several occasions for about 14 hours here in LA.
And you indicated you interviewed Diane Vandermolen, and she is a cousin, is that
Yes.
correct, of Lyle Menendez? And Alan Anderson is a cousin?
Yes,
Stacy Feldman is his first girlfriend.
yes,
You mentioned Terry and Carlos Peralt and their three of their daughters.
3 of their 4, yes,
Okay, and their daughters are adults now?
yes,
And you interviewed Joan Vandermolen, who is Kitty Menendez's sister,
yes.
and Pat Anderson, who was Kitty
Sister-in-law,
Menendez's sister-in-law, married to her brother Brian, is that
Yes.
correct? And Maria Menendez, who is Lyle's grandmother and
Yes.
the mother of Jose Menendez?
yes,
How many times
Interesting.
did you talk to her?
twice.
And you mentioned Marta Cano. Did you also
So far, I think this might be the only witness who has interviewed the grandmother, which is interesting.
talk to Lester Summerfield, who was Kitty Menendez's treating psychologist for a number of years?
Yes, for about 2 hours.
Were there any other witnesses you attempted to interview but were not permitted to?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall, you can answer the question.
Yes, I tried to arrange a interview with Kathy, who is Lyle's cousin who lives in Northern California, and we were never able to dovetail it with the time that I was going to be there for some other reason. I also tried to interview Kitty's brothers, Brian and Milton, and they were unresponsive to my letters and a phone call.
That's like with the last witness, Dr. Stuart.
Who is it that made the
Hart.
determination who you would speak to personally?
I did. I also tried, by the way, to reach Donovan Goudreau and had his numbers, but and left messages, but never had heard back from him.
It's exactly what Dr. Stuart Hart said as well about about Donovan Goudreau.
I decided who I would interview.
Were there any limitations placed on you in terms of what material would be made available to you?
Only my own time and energy.
Were there any limitations placed on you with regard to who you could speak to?
No,
Were there any limitations placed on you with regard to your access to Lyle Menendez,
no.
other than
Logistics.
the jail? When you visited with Lyle Menendez, did you see him by yourself or was there someone else with you?
I saw him by myself on almost every occasion. There was one, probably 1 hour period where I saw Lyle and Erik together. But primarily I saw Lyle alone.
Now, from the list of witnesses that you personally interviewed, it appears that a majority of them are family members. Is that correct?
Yes.
And why was it important to you to interview family members?
Well, it's always important in an evaluation to get information from other people who potentially have information, have access to information about critical points in a person's life. I was primarily concerned about family members because I thought they would be in the best position to describe the family that Lyle grew up in.
Was it important to you to try to develop information about Kitty Menendez's childhood family?
Yes,
And was it important to you to try to develop information about Jose Menendez's childhood family?
yes.
Why would that be important?
Well,
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
May we approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Conte, did you interview family members in an effort to gather information about the childhood experiences of Kitty and Jose Menendez?
yes,
And did you take that information into consideration in rendering an opinion in this case?
yes,
You indicated that you spoke to Diane Vandermolen. Is
Yes.
that correct? And what information of significance did you receive from her?
Well, I think a number of things. I think probably in some ways the most important is her description of Lyle attempting to tell her when he was about 8 about some kind of touching with his father. There are other things as well that are important. She describes what it was like for her to be a guest living for a time with Lyle and his family. So she describes things such as the dramatic change in the atmosphere and people's attitudes when Jose would come home, for example. She described Lyle as being kind of relaxed and friendly and joking around, and Dad walking in and he would become very serious and reserved. She describes punishment or hearing punishment going on, something going on in the boys' rooms, and a clear message from Kitty that one did not go down the hall when that was taking place. She describes the temper tantrums, the rages that her aunt would periodically fly into. She describes being out at a party and falling asleep and coming home in the wee hours of the morning, and her aunt going into a rage about what inappropriate behavior she was engaging in, and Diane trying to tell her Aunt Kitty that she fell asleep on the couch at a house of a gay man, and Kitty blurting out that gay men have sex with women too, quite angrily. She describes when she became pregnant and was not married, the great pressure that was put on her to have an abortion because she owed it to Jose and to the reputation. And when she refused to do that, the sort of...
Your Honor, at this time, I would strike the information contained about the abortion as being irrelevant, subject to prior.
All right.
Interesting.
What I'm going to do is sustain the objection as to the entire answer and strike it. Jury is admonished to disregard it as hearsay. And if there is something specific that you wanted to bring out, Ms. Lansing, perhaps you could focus on it rather than have the witnesses recite everything that was said by the witness who did testify here in court. And the jury has seen that witness's testimony. So the entire answer.
I mean, it's also direct examination, so you can't really ask leading questions. But now she's probably going to have to ask some leading questions in response to that admonition by the judge.
Stricken, the jury is admonished to disregard it.
What was the significance of the information that you've given us here in terms of evaluating Lyle's life during the periods of time that Diane Vandermolen was there? What view of the family did this information give you?
Talking about the information about the pressure to have an abortion, or?
No, the information that Diane gave you when she talks about the rages. What does that tell you about this family?
Well, it tells us about a family who has at least one family member who is likely to fly into extreme rages, who can be quite unpredictable. A family where appearance and secrecy are facts of life. About a family that can exclude people if they don't behave in certain ways that meet the family standard. She also talked about an incident with her cousins of sexual behavior in which they interacted with her, and she went away with the feeling that these boys had been through this before, that they were experienced.
Now, when you say with her cousins, you're talking about Lyle and Erik.
Yes.
And are you referring to the incident she testified to here in court about there's one incident where they tie her up and attempt to take her blouse off, and another incident in which Lyle makes some aggressive sexual moves toward her in front of the television set?
Yes.
What was the significance of those events to you with regard to Lyle Menendez?
Well, I think the most significant is her sense that Lyle especially was experienced, that he had done this before. This wasn't a fresh kid doing it for the first time. So I think it suggests, it's not diagnostic, but it's suggestive of prior sexual experience on Lyle's part.
And at the age that this behavior was taking place, this is before his first girlfriend, is that correct?
Yes.
And do you draw any conclusions with regard to information Lyle Menendez gave you as to where he got that prior experience?
It is consistent with his description of his sexual interaction or sexual abuse by his mother.
Do you have any other information of sexual contact prior to the incident with Diane with anyone other than his mother or his father?
No.
You talked about the fact that she described rages by Mrs. Menendez.
Yes.
Did you receive information with regard to the existence of those rages beyond the period that Diane Vandermolen was talking about?
Yes, I believe Lyle's cousin Alan saw them at different points, and certainly Lyle and Erik described them.
And when Lyle talked about his mother's behavior and emotional states, did he describe rages as well?
Yes.
What other emotional states did he describe with regard to his mother? What other behavior did he observe?
In addition to the rages?
Yes.
Oh, there'd be periods where she'd be tearful and weeping. There'd be periods where she would go into what he called kind of high energy, where she would do the same task over and over. She might take all the rubber bands out and sort them by size, or she might take all the silverware out. We talked about periods where she would get quite interested in various businesses. For example, at one point she wanted to sell something called Shockley Products and threw out all his and Erik's toys and put them down in the basement and bought all of these products presumably to sell, and then never did very much to sell them. Or she had a rug business.
I need to strike that incident as being hearsay.
It's a basis for his opinion, Your Honor.
All right, well, let me say this again, ladies and gentlemen, as I said before, if the witness during his testimony recites things that have been related to him by other people outside of the courtroom, or he's read in statements made by other people outside of the courtroom that you have not heard, they are not being received for the truth of what he says was said to him. They're just being received for the basis of any opinions the witness expresses, and you're not to find that these events actually happened, or that these statements that are made describing certain events describe events that actually happened. They're just a basis for his opinions if he expresses opinions based upon that information. And certainly you have seen many witnesses testify here in court, and those things about which the witness testifies based upon those things that you've seen here in court, the witnesses that have testified, he refers to their testimony here in court. You've seen it, you can evaluate it and decide whether those witnesses have accurately or inaccurately told you what has occurred as a basis for his opinions. But when things are described of events that have been related to the witness outside of the courtroom, you have no way of personally evaluating that since you haven't seen those witnesses describe those events. And at this point, the witness just relies upon them as a basis for his opinions. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you. Based on the information you received about Kitty Menendez, did you attempt to make an evaluation as to whether she suffered from any sort of mental disease or defect or any sort of personality disorder?
Yes.
Objection, inappropriate.
Objection overruled. To the form of the question, the answer will stand.
Yes.
And what other information did you rely on in attempting to make that evaluation?
Well, I reviewed the mental health information from her psychiatrist and also from her treating psychologist, treatment notes, the psychological tests that Dr. Summerfield had conducted at the time he was treating her. some information from her sister and sister-in-law.
Was it important to you to understand Kitty Menendez's behavior in order to evaluate the information you were receiving from Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
And what conclusions did you reach with regard to her behavior?
Objection, inappropriate opinion.
You'll have to reframe the question.
What information did you have? What conclusions did you reach with regard to her behavioral patterns, relying on all the information you've referred to so far?
Objection, improper opinion.
It's still vague as to what you're asking.
Were you able to reach a tentative diagnosis of Kitty Menendez based on all of the information you had, including the notes of her treating therapist?
Yes.
And what was that conclusion?
Objection, improper opinion.
You're asking for a clinical diagnosis?
Yes, I am.
Objection overruled.
Lack of foundation.
Okay, you want to approach and we'll discuss it?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to continue on here with the lawyers, but there's no need to keep you here any longer. I know you've had some good conversations over there, but tomorrow morning, I'd ask that you get here a little earlier so we can get an earlier start, knowing full well that I've told you that we won't be in session in the afternoon, so we can hopefully get an earlier start in the morning. And we want to, if we can all at all possible, finish this witness's testimony. So expect to be here probably until around 12:30 tomorrow, but let's see if we can all get here at 8:30 tomorrow and see if we can start. So if you can all get here even a little before 8:30 so that when we open the doors, assuming everyone is here and ready to go, we can start up. I know as soon as I say that, something will happen and someone won't be here, but you never know. Let's not, as an individuals, each one of you as an individual, be the one who holds us up. So let's see if we can all be here tomorrow at 8:30 so we can start at that time, okay? All right, we'll see you tomorrow at 8:30.
Please don't be the one that holds everybody else up.
All right, did you wish to question at all, Ms. Lansing, or defer to the prosecution?
Okay, so this is going to be outside the presence of the jury here. I am going to cut this off here for today. We will pick up again in then in the next episode when we do get back to where the jury is present in the courtroom. Even though this is probably some interesting stuff to get into. What they are getting at this point is they're trying to determine whether or not he can share a diagnosis that he has made of Kitty Menendez after reviewing her file and reviewing the notes by her treating psychiatrist, et cetera, et cetera. ICU, is this the first trial? Yes. This is the only one that was televised, is the 1993 trial. So yes, this is the first one. Atheist Ant, can 403, 404 type info of admissible hearsay of people the expert interviewed affect whether the judge allows it in? I mean, if we're talking about hearsay, it depends on the purpose of why it's being brought in, right? If it's being brought in because it was something that he relied upon for his expert opinion, then that's something that he can testify to. This is why the judge in this case has been giving some admonitions as to what the jury should be concluding or should not be concluding about what he says about these statements that were made to him, that they shouldn't just assume that it's true because he's testifying to it, because that's just sort of like bootstrapping in out of court statements, which are properly hearsay. So yeah, I hope I answered your question there with that. Okay. So reminder that next Monday we're not doing classic trials. I am taking a little bit of an extended weekend break. So but next week there will be other content and all kinds of stuff, and this week as well. But just so you guys know, no classic trials next week. We'll have to pick it up the week after that, I think, unless no, that's right. That's fine. The following week we will. After that, then we've got Karen Reed trial stuff coming up. So week after next, we will have the next what was I going to say? The next classic trials. And also Mountain Princess 207. A members only live stream will be on Thursday this week. I'm going to put some posts out for all of this stuff. But just wanted to remind you guys here. Yeah, and I think that's about it. So, all right. Thank you so much for joining me for this. And thank you, of course, to all the folks that are in the chat during the live stream. Thank you to the folks that are commenting on the videos on replay. Thanks to everybody who is just watching and lurking, you know, as you are going about your work day or whatever time it is that you're watching this. And of course, thank you as always to the mods for always making sure that, you know, everybody in the chat has the ability to come with their different perspectives and different experiences and all that kind of stuff. I love seeing the engagement that folks give in the chat. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Just because. Thank you so much for the 10 gifted Legal Bites memberships. Very kind and generous of you. So Arter Risnin, I Love Pie, Crystal Desaro, Phoenix, Whoever, Nomad Purple, Atea, A Scout and a Bradley, Tracy B, and Baxter, you have all been gifted memberships by Just Because. So welcome or welcome back to Bite Club. I hope to see you guys on Thursday for sure. And yeah, I think that's about it. That's all I got for today. So thank you so much, you guys. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Monday, whatever's left of it, and a wonderful rest of your week. If you are interested in the Ruby Frankie case, then tomorrow we're going to have some content on the recent evidence dump on that, because it's been interesting what's come out of that. Okay, guys, that'll about do it. On that note, thanks again, Just Because. Very kind of you. Okay. All right, guys. With that, I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.